Alright, going over part 2 of Castle of Frankenstein. Usually I don't start on the same article, but I want to finish off the EC. It was kind of fascinating, the history of it, stuff I didn't even know about the origins of comic books themselves. They bring, of course, the idea of the horror stuff really kicks off. You have, you say, imitations. I hate to say, I like a lot of the other companies. Harvey in particular. Ace was another one. American Comics Group. Master Comics. They make dark mysteries. I kind of like. There's so much of this golden age, pre-code horror. I can't even begin, but we'll stick with the EC. I like how they go that in terms of the artists. Every artist has his own signature style. Right, so they got some, like Graham Ingalls and Jack Davis had that kind of hairy look. We gave them the horrible ones because they were horrible. We gave guys like Jack Kamen and George Evans the nice clean ones, like Razors in the Wall. I think that's a reference. Remember that story? Remember the one? That was the one with Patrick McGee when they made the Tales from the Crypt film. They going here. Interesting how they scriber. Look, they actually used this Leroy lettering system. So, the distinctive look was a consistent use of uniform caption and speech bubble lettering. Right, lettering. Lettering is not easy. Scribe. I know a dude that stabbed somebody with a scriber in self-defense. Like the Leroy Scriber. Now we go here. Now, of course, we get the complaints from the parents. It's like, the oppression. Come on, man. You know back then how people were. Parents weren't gonna like this stuff. I mean, some of this stuff was pretty heady. Right? I mean, just for real. Of course, not compared to what was coming. Right? See, it was the revenge. Right? Parents were like to push back some parents and other alarmed citizens who have been reading disparaging articles about comic books. See, I don't get that. They make it sound like, okay, the people, these articles influence them. I mean, I can understand people not liking this, but then especially if you're coming out of the time period I'm talking about, right? The war, right? Always the war. I temporarily suppressed the mounting anti-comics movement. Now the fight was over. The campaign flared again with renewed vigor. Just like, at one point they even were looking for submissions. Right? Essentially, they were running out of ideas. Interesting. So, but now Kurtzman, remember Two-Fisted Tales. Now you look at I was looking through the Two-Fisted Tales the other day. Frontline Combat, another one. A lot of Korean War stories, but I was amazed, especially at some of the historical stuff. A lot of stuff John Severin did, but like the French and Indian War stuff, the Revolutionary War stuff, very realistic. Interesting though, there was a little schism here with Harvey Kurtzman. Right, Gaines said that Feldstein outproduced him. His books were making more money, but Kurtzman started with this Mad Magazine. Now, you could argue that Mad Magazine was probably the most popular thing that ever came out of the William Gaines publishing. Right? Just conservative religious organizations. Encouraging the house siege of comics and bonfires not seen since Hitler's Germany. What book about? Okay, burning comic books. What were? Did you ever read the list of the books that were being burned in Hitler's Germany? Yeah, I'm just saying. It doesn't seem like it kind of matches. Now, this is interesting here. Why I keep saying always the war? The frenzy had been building momentum since the mid-40s. I would keep saying the period in 1945 to before the 50s. It's a pretty dark period. A lot of your noir films come out in that time. There was a lot of issues, a lot of problems. The economy had not gotten really good yet, right? From all the prosperity won by the war, right? By killing millions of people. Millions of children, fathers in the war, mothers were working in factories, supporting the war effort. These children became America's first latchkey kids. Hey, that's me. Right? But now, of course, I was the later generation. After their own devices and free to wander the streets, loitering, breaking curfews, and getting into trouble. Boys joined gangs, girls shed their morals. Right? Now, that was a big thing about these hearings, right? The idea of juvenile delinquency. Now, the horror comics were mentioned in them, but just as much, if maybe not, maybe a little more, the real issue were the crime comics, okay? Where you had criminals, of course, back then, the criminal wasn't celebrated, right? Crime doesn't pay was always the theme. In the end, the hood always got his. Either shot down in the street or got the electric chair, the gas chamber. But it's interesting here, the idea of the juvenile delinquency you got here, right? The Catholic Church was in the middle of the fray. That's kind of funny though, and I wanted you to look at the nuance of this, of conservatives, right? But the what is this? That's funny. The Catholic Church was in the middle of the fray by irrationally appropriating superheroes as a proxy for spreading and coding message of fascist idealism. Now we all know, right? We all know that the American right, the conservatism, and I would dare say even the church. We know that these are no obstacles to liberalism, no obstacles to modernity, no obstacles to transgression or subversion, no obstacles at all. The thing that was an obstacle to that, okay, had been utterly annihilated for all time. So it doesn't matter, right? Anyway, the standard bearer for the fracas was a progressive-minded psychiatrist, Frederick Wertham. Who was Frederick Wertham? Was he a Russian? Frederick Wertham was not a right winger. He fled a country because he was not a right winger. What country was that? No. And he did this seduction of the innocent. He wrote this whole thing about the infamous comics, right? Causing the problems. He had the book Seduction of the Innocent. He had the medical expert. The influence of comic books on today's youth. Now, of course, the irony of all this stuff, it's always ironic that in this 1950s, a decade and a half later from this stuff, you are going to have transgressions like you've never seen in comparison to what this stuff seemed like a damn, like a picnic. Same thing in the 80s, right? You think of all the scares you had in the 80s. By the end of the 90s, man, none of that stuff, all that stuff was gone. All that religious thing was gone. So, and I argue that it should be. But anyway, so of course they self-regulated, right? The comics code, right? One of the big things that you see, right? They banned the words horror, terror, and weird, right? The weird tales. They kind of banned those things. That's why in DC Comics, you had horror comics. They were called mystery comics, right? They would never use the word horror. Of course, you had the James Warren Publishing, who I mistake in the last video. I said James Warren instead of Archie Goodwin, but of course they got around that by making black and white magazines that were not comics. Right, and of course Mad Magazine became a big thing, but that's how they got around the comics code. Okay? Of course, remember Gold Key and Dell never signed on with them in the first place, but it's interesting. Of course, William Gaines lived until the early 90s. You got to see the revival of the Tales from the Crypt TV show. Anyway, I don't want to do another long video, but this is interesting here. A little comic here. The history of horror. Of course, Mary Shelley. Of course, the 19th century stuff I talked about a lot. The fin de soleil. The silent era. Right. What we just talked about. Oh, who's that? Oh, what are you trying to do? Do you know what he is? Anyway, it's a Russian. literature, of course, Hammer films, these science fiction films of the 50s, the 70s stuff, Scooby Doo. 70s saw shit from horror monsters that can be killed and invading space aliens to unstoppable forces of nature, right? A more cynical era of the 70s, right? And of course, go into the next decade, some hits the 90s, in my opinion, brought about two very dreadful trends. Handheld or found footage horror. Hey, come on. And remakes of horror films from overseas. Yeah, I could agree with that. Anyway, I could go over. I won't go everything. I want you to get this. Is recommended. This is ironically when this is at the tail end demographically monster kids of having retail outfits that actually sell things. Although apparently Barnes and Nobles is increasing their numbers. You have some of the best monster, you know, classic horror stuff magazines that you probably ever had. I mean, this thing is like, let's be honest, this is 100 times better than the old horror magazines, like famous monsters of filmland. It's fucking jokes, like kindergarten. Oh, French horror cinema. Now, they always bring up, rightfully so, right? What is it about the French, right? The fantastique, right? They don't really have a horror genre, and they don't really have a lot of French horror films. You can list them easily in a couple of pages. Of course, the silent era, of course, the Malay stuff I had talked about. Some of the early stuff, I saw this one here. You get some of the Grand Gourmand things adapted to the silent films. Very effective, but you really don't have much. There's just something about the French, because the Latin realism, okay, which doesn't lend itself to horror. But then how do you explain Italy? Well, I remember was it Diabolique? I remember watching this. In the late 80s on Uncle Ted's Monster Mania. Okay, when I was in Pennsylvania watching, I think at my cousin's, watching Uncle Ted from Pittston, Pennsylvania. And they had all the wacky films, but then they showed this film. Interesting, very interesting film. Remember the husband's body in the bathtub, right? The implied lesbianism of the two women. Of course, Jean Rollin, right? The lone auteur. I mentioned that he's pretty much the only prolific French filmmaker you have up until when you get to the later. But there's some other things here. The Daughters of Darkness. Oh, real quick, The Spirits of the Dead. Remember the French-Italian anthology of Poe adaptations? They mentioned the ones here. It's funny, the cast includes, they don't mention who I went over, Terrence Stamp, right? Playing Toby Dammit. Oh, recommended though. They used to show this on Channel 5, dude. We got some interesting ones here, but the new French Extremity, right? You only get, I read Devil's Story. That is a crazy movie. Devil's Story is weird, dude. Weird, very strange. And the new French Extremity, of course, High Tension. Very politically incorrect movie by today's standards. And remember, this film remember Brotherhood of the Wolf? Brotherhood of the Wolf was awesome, bro. Remember this film? This was, I don't know. This was such a good film that you almost forget about it. I mean, I know that's hard to explain. This was such a great film, man. Anyway, I'm gonna wrap it up. I go a little long. Oh, the Neanderthal man. Oh, get those Cro-Magnon women. Get revenge for them exterminating you. Oh, no. Hey, we all have, all us Europeans. These are our great. We have their DNA in us. Leon Atwill, right? Let's go on. I can't go over everything. They made a good point for this guy possibly being up there with Karloff and Lugosi at the time. With the infamous mystery of the Wax Museum, the gruesome makeup. I always hear about this film. There you go. The rest of it was, movie reviews, book reviews. Wasn't really anything interesting in here too much. To Timmy, you better try again. And then that's pretty much the Castle of Frankenstein. I want to wrap it up. So, yeah, man, good stuff, dude. The classic horror, it's always around because there's a lot of it. There's still more you discover, and it's very quaint. It's like looking at another planet now, looking at the men and the women from that time. So, yeah, Frankenstein. Just call me Frankenstein. That's me. I feel like Frankenstein a lot. The monster, obviously, not the scientist.